It's 11:47 p.m. You're staring at a message you already know is a lie. Your thumb is hovering over the reply box, and before you've even typed a word, something inside you is already building the case for them. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I'm overreacting. You will call what happens next forgiveness. Nietzsche would have called it something much uglier. This isn't a video about becoming bitter. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about that thin, performative coldness people post about when they want to look healed. This is about a much quieter problem. The moment a person mistakes self-erasure for spiritual maturity. The moment your dignity goes silent and you congratulate yourself for the silence. If you've been forgiving the same person for the same thing for years and calling that growth, this is the operating system you were never told about. Quick note before we go deeper. If you're the kind of person who reads everyone in the room and walks out feeling unread, subscribe. This channel decodes patterns nobody tells you about. The kind you've felt for years without a name. Back to it. Nietzsche wasn't interested in whether you should forgive. That question is too small. He was interested in something far more uncomfortable. He wanted to know what was underneath the word. What hidden motive a person was protecting every time they reached for moral language. Because here's the thing about virtue. Real virtue is rare. What's much more common is a person using virtuous words to dress up something they don't want to look at. Through a Nietzschean lens, the question is never, should I forgive this? The question is sharper. What part of me benefits from calling this forgiveness? Stay with that. Because what follows decodes 5 versions of you that have been answering that question without knowing it. You didn't forgive them. You were afraid of what would happen if you stopped. Look closely at the last time you forgave someone who didn't ask for it. Was there peace in that decision? Or was there something else? A low hum of dread underneath the choice. The mechanism is this. Confrontation has a cost. It demands you say the sentence out loud. It demands you watch their face change. It demands you stand in the silence after. So the mind invents a workaround. It gives the avoidance a beautiful name. It calls it being the bigger person. It calls it not stooping to their level. It calls it peace. But peace that comes from not speaking is not peace. It's a held breath. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some people don't forgive to free their soul. They forgive because confrontation would destroy the version of themselves they're trying to protect. There's a second version of false forgiveness. And this one is harder to see because the person doing it actually feels good about it. You became addicted to being the good person. Somewhere along the way, maybe in childhood, maybe in church, maybe just in how your family handed out praise, you learned that being good was the safest currency. So you spent your whole adult life keeping that account open. But identities cost something, and the cost of the good person identity is this. You need a constant supply of situations where you can prove it, which means you need people who keep crossing the line. You need disrespect. You need someone to forgive again, so you can confirm to yourself one more time that yes, you are still that person. The mechanism is parasitic. The disrespect feeds the identity. The identity needs the disrespect. When being good becomes your identity, disrespect becomes the tax you pay to keep that identity alive. If any of this is hitting too close, drop a single word in the comments. Just one. Whatever you've been calling it until now. Patience, compassion, kindness, maturity. I read those, and the patterns in them tell me what to decode next. A like also helps this video find people who needed it 3 years ago. Now, the third version. The third version is the one that destroys decades. You weren't dealing with a mistake. You were dealing with a pattern, and you kept treating each instance like it was the first. Here's the trick the mind plays. Each individual event, in isolation, seems forgivable. They were stressed that night. They were drinking. They didn't realize. Every single occurrence has a story attached. But step back. Look at 20 of those stories stacked on top of each other. That's not 20 mistakes. That's a signature. The mechanism is called episodic framing. The brain prefers to handle one event at a time because that's manageable. The cost of zooming out and seeing the whole pattern is unbearable, because the moment you see the pattern, you also see how long you've been inside it. So the mind stays in close. It debates each event. It forgives each event. It refuses to do the math. A mistake asks for forgiveness. A pattern asks for distance. And the person who keeps forgiving a pattern isn't being merciful. They're being blind on purpose, because the alternative would require them to act on a truth they've been avoiding for years. The fourth version is the most intimate. It happens silently, inside you, and nobody else witnesses it. You saw something, clearly. You knew what you saw. And then, somewhere between seeing it and the next morning, you went back and softened the memory. You added context they didn't earn. You inserted reasonable explanations they didn't give you. You worked on the story until it was something you could live with. That's not forgiveness. That's a betrayal, but of yourself. The mechanism is this. To preserve the relationship, the image of the other person had to stay intact. And the only thing standing in the way of that image was your own perception. So your perception was the thing that had to bend. You called it being understanding. You called it not jumping to conclusions. You called it giving them the benefit of the doubt. But here's the part nobody talks about. Every time you do that, a small piece of your trust in yourself breaks, because some deep part of you remembers what you actually saw. And that part of you watched you negotiate it away. And it doesn't forget. The first betrayal was not what they did to you. The first betrayal was the moment you explained it away. The fifth version is the one Nietzsche took the most seriously. Sometimes forgiveness is just a beautiful word for refusing to act. Acting is hard. Acting means leaving the apartment. It means ending the friendship. It means the family Christmas changes forever. It means people you grew up with will say you've changed, and they won't mean it kindly. So you don't act. You sit in the situation. And because sitting still feels passive, the mind needs to give that stillness a moral upgrade. It calls the inaction patience. It calls the avoidance grace. It calls the paralysis forgiveness. But underneath all that vocabulary, nothing has actually changed. You're still in the same room with the same person doing the same thing. The only thing that's evolved is the language you use to describe your own stillness. Through a Nietzschean lens, this is the part that mattered most. Nietzsche's nightmare wasn't the cruel person. It was the person who lost their will and learned to call that loss goodness. So now look back. You thought forgiveness meant you had finally risen above the wound, that you had grown, that you had become the kind of person who lets things go. But sometimes it only means the wound learned how to speak politely. You weren't forgiving them because you were free. You were forgiving them because you were still negotiating with the cage. That's the part Nietzsche refused to look away from. The way human beings dress up their captivity in moral robes. The way the prisoner, after long enough, begins to write poetry about the bars. Now, this isn't a video telling you never to forgive anyone. That would be its own kind of stupidity. The opposite of self-erasure isn't permanent rage, it's something more precise. Real forgiveness exists, but it has terms most people never name out loud. Real forgiveness does not require access. You can release someone internally without giving them a seat at your table again. Real forgiveness does not require re-entry. The relationship doesn't get restored automatically just because the hatred faded. Real forgiveness does not require forgetting. You can let the anger go without erasing the data the experience taught you. Forgiveness is internal. Re-entry is relational. Those are two completely different decisions. And the people who blur them are the ones who end up forgiving the same person for the same thing for 20 years. You can drop the rage. You can drop the scorekeeping. You can wish them well from a great distance. None of that requires you to hand them the keys again. That's the line most people never learn to draw, and it's the line that separates real forgiveness from slow disappearance. The most dangerous kind of disrespect is not the kind that arrives loudly. It's the kind you slowly rename until it sounds like maturity. You call it patience. You call it compassion. You call it forgiveness. But somewhere underneath all of that language, your dignity is still keeping score. And the score doesn't lie, even when you do. If this decoded something you've been feeling but couldn't name, drop a comment with the version of false forgiveness that hit hardest. A, B, C, D, or E. I read every one. The patterns in your answers tell me what to decode next. A like helps the algorithm find the next person who needs this, and the video appearing on your screen right now. That one goes deeper into what happens to a person who sees everyone clearly and gets seen by no one. If this hit, that one will hit harder. I decode the patterns nobody told you about. See you in the next one.